seriously think about this stuff.
Sorry, I really wish I'd recorded this, so I gotta start it over. Go ahead. Martin,
Well,
go ahead.
Martin can frame us back
I
in.
was just saying that most of them don't seriously think about this stuff. They just know if they claim it's oppression, they get free stuff.
Yeah,
That's how it is.
and they don't
Yes.
have to adapt.
Yes.
So, Luke, what did you say? You said, I want to get back Brandon and Luke's comment there if I can.
Yeah. So, I don't know, just an observation about people in general. You know, they so many believe that their way of living is the one right way to live, right? So that means that their expression, their civilization, their culture, whatever, is human. It's not just a technology that humans are utilizing or leveraging, that it is human. There's not they don't know how to make that distinction there.
And Brandon, you were saying,
Well, the distinction is the usage of tools to relegate yourself above animals,
yeah,
to deliver yourself there as frequently as possible and forego taking care of the externalities.
but you're talking about the prices. What I'm talking, I want to reiterate, you said that very beautifully about, this is cast.
Yes, what everyone is framing as whiteness, even us, that's the cost. That's the cost of the civilizational emergence that everyone demonstrates wanting to be part of. I mean, they migrate to all the Western civilization nations from around the world all the time. It's because the norms are superior. It's because the commons are superior. There's not another reason for it.
No.
That's why I was making the point I was making those is people hear us say that and they think we're saying to be white is to be human, and that's the only way to be human. What we're saying is all it is a technology.
Yeah.
Leverage it to your benefit.
Yeah. Well,
Or in other words, to produce all this, it's insufficient to be human.
oh, that was brilliant, Martin.
Yeah.
That was fucking brilliant.
That's
Human's an animal. Like
that's
any
the right.
other.
Yeah.
I try to differentiate between human animals and then people who choose. Human animals are not proactive, they're reactive. They have particular biases. If you're an affront to them, they act in a small set of reactions. We're talking earlier about the disparities in reactions of individual people. There's a different threshold for violence for different people. Men's threshold is lower than women's. Blacks' threshold is lower than whites. It's just the way that things are. It's the same in the dog world. We deal mostly with thresholds, not behaviors. All dogs will act aggressive. It's a matter of the pressure you put on them in order to bring the display out. People are not different than that.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, the pressures make all the difference. You got
Also,
if you're exposed to the wrong ones, you're gonna exhibit dysfunction. If you're exposed to the right ones, you're gonna exhibit development. It's all pressures.
Our governance should be the right pressures. That's its job, to govern you. Governors are limits.
Yeah, that's what a governor is.
It's machinery.
The problem is well understood, though, is that it takes a very small minority to undermine an existing system. It's much smaller than you think. In other words, your need then there's this, everybody says, well, I don't want to have fascism, totalitarianism. Well, I don't want totalitarianism, which is whether I want fascism or not, I don't know what that means. Whether if it means that I want an ethnocentric state, which is basically an extension of the family, well, then that's absolutely true. Does it mean that should violate natural law? Well, of course not. In other words, just makes violation that the computations you're using for staying within natural law are limited to are not externalized for profit or internalized for cost, right? I mean, it's just, are we working on behalf of the extended family, which is, of course, the lowest friction, most redistributed, most beneficial method you can, because it produces the highest trust because of the least diversity of competition. So the problem becomes, and I'm so afraid to go down this. I'm actually afraid to go down that track. So the problem becomes when you have conflicts, when you have people who want to have different status signals, and whatever. Now, in some cases, that's going to be just historical, cultural information, and some reasons it's going to be because of a a demographic difference in the population, which in this case is almost always going to be IQ, because despite what everybody wants to say, that is the one universal measure that describes all difference between all peoples and all people and all peoples and all countries. And we know that IQ is basically neoteny, and so absence of genetic load. Well, the problem for different cultures is if we go from Black to South Eurasian to East and West, we end up with at least a 3-tiered system of neotonic development. Truth is, the East Asians are way more neotenous than the rest of us, and Europeans used to be more neotenous than South Eurasians, right? The problem is that we've had this intermixtion, and so we're now slightly less neotenous or more distributed, and the East has maintained neotenous. Well, I mean, you could say that okay, well, that's great, but that's like assuming there's like an infinite neoteny is good when it turns out East Asian neoteny went too far. And so it's not always a good thing. So you say, so it's like mama bear, was it baby bear, mama bear, and daddy bear? And I don't remember whose porridge is just right. Does anybody remember the story of the 3 bears and whose porridge is just right?
In the story, it's always the children's version that's just right.
Okay, all right. So
it's always the last one.
Okay, so the children's version is just right because it's not too hot. Anyway, well, it's the same thing with neoteny, is that if you take,
which is what the left is distributing, you're displaying right now, the children's version in all things.
Oh God, it's fucking Thursday morning. It's only a half hour on discussion. You gotta just ruin the day this early. Anyway, so where was I? So the problem is, there's a problem of enough. Like I always say this, if you take I have some friends from Persia, right, from Iran, right, and they were kicked out at the time, and they left at the time of the Shah's takeover, right, and so they're Persian, they're white, they have black hair, but they have the normal Indo-European form. So, and then like I can't tell the fucking difference between an educated Persian and a Westerner, except that they have more old-fashioned family-oriented morals instead of more commons-oriented morals and ethics and understanding. So I mean, it's not this uniform, but in general, if you look at the certain black community, certain parts of Africa, then the middle parts of Africa, then the edge parts of Africa, and then you go from there and you go from Yemen, which is basically is the most African South Eurasian combination, and you work your way up, you get this spectrum. But then you go to the middle and it's like a derivation. Then you go to the extremes of East and West and you get this derivation. And what you're talking about really is just what Luke said, is how much does it take to make you express aggression? Because that's what neoteny does. Right, that's the trade-off, right?
The rate and willingness of adaptation, which we capture in IQ, right? The rate and willingness of adaptation. Yeah. Willingness runs out of being good after a while, right? Because you're being forced. You can't always just be willing to go along with what other people are doing. Adapting isn't always the way. Conservatives have that bias. They resist adaptation. A lot of the problem I see on the right is they get their intellectual status by disagreeing, by being the person who's outwardly against the crowd.
Which they actually view it as being moral, which is okay. It's moral to object. It isn't, but that doesn't mean that your objection is true or good, right? That's you're demonstrating truth before face or honesty by objecting. The problem is, so that's actually a moral signal. The problem is you have to know whether you're right or not. It's the conviction that you're right that's the problem.
Well, you see that across all the leaders on the right, right? They have a sticking point, and that's what they lead upon. It's not always correct. Aligning those disagreeable thinkers that's what the law does. We have to abide by these criteria when moving through solving problems at human scale, where people have to get along. Well, we don't want to see our cities devolve at the rate they're devolving. I mean, right now it's being televised, their decline.
Well,
I don't mind so much.
all right, so I'm trying to get trying to make a point by avoiding a point. So I was definitely raised, and the boomers were raised in an era where we were trying to make room for everybody, under the pretense that everybody would adopt whiteness voluntarily, right? Rather than that we needed to use all these institutions to force people into whiteness, right? And that was a replacement for, it just requires white people to be white, to behave whiteness. Right? Well, that isn't true, because it is a technology, and we see plenty of people from around the world integrating just fine. So I mean, it's largely educated people, right? Because they have the least dependence on the norms, traditions, and values of their culture to avoid error and offense, right? They have the most adaptability because they're most educated, because that's an evidence of their most intelligent. So they're most adaptive, so that's easy. So the problem is, if neoteny is, as I said, which is the case, which is, and then, I mean, just realize that neoteny can express itself in every race, right? I mean, it's not whatever, and IQ can express in every race. So it's really just a distribution problem. What's the distribution of it? So I mean, are these in other words, it's like, if you go to South America, the lighter kids in the family are a higher status symbol, and the parents will push them forward, right? This is true in Africa too. I mean, in India, it's like a big thing, right? So you'll try, if you're a guy, you want to marry a lighter colored woman, so your kid will be lighter colored, so they'll be, well, that's why India is. I was trying to work on Indian racism the past couple of days because it's fascinating to me. It's like, I don't get it, right? I mean, how can you be that racist internally? But it turns out they're the most racist, and we're like looking at them and like, I don't get it, you know. It makes sense to me, but they are. And then the Chinese, who are the Hans, right? The Han is a very racist philosophy, right? I mean, everybody thinks they're Han because they've been indoctrinated into Han, except that only the Han are Han and everybody else isn't. Right? They think that's why the Han majority looks like majority, is because most people consider themselves Han, even though almost everybody's only partly. So I'm just wondering, you know, if there is a difference in, for example, the canonical example we're using today is the criminality aggression symptom in African Americans remains constant regardless of class. So educated blacks are just as are maintain the same ratio problems even if they're in the upper classes.
You know, it goes up.
Sorry?
It goes up with class. Correct.
Sorry. They have more agency, so they can be more class. So the problem is, and part of the problem is we have all this data on black people, but we don't have, and versus white, and it sounds like a black-white thing when you're trying to say, can we get enough data across at least the 4 primary races or the 7 primary sub-races that we can demonstrate this issue with enough clarity that we can get over the hurdle of claiming everybody's equally plastic. But the answer is that the aggression, neotonic expression, shows up, right? It shows up constantly, regardless of what we do. It shows up regardless of IQ and class. So, in other words, is our belief that this is a solvable problem false?
No, you need an outlet for aggression. To integrate aggressive people, you need an outlet for aggression. We used to have them. We don't anymore. So it comes out socially as opposed to adversarially redirected to the comments.
Well, I mean,
fighting for. Sorry, Martin.
I mean, you can correct the group by incrementally getting rid of the aggressive people. But I still don't see a reason why we need to integrate them.
Well, I mean, just I agree. There are two questions, right? And that's the problem, is that I think what's happened in my generation and the generation before mine is that we are biased to try to make everybody happy. Very Christian, right? And then what's happening in the younger generation is this bifurcation among people who try to make everybody happy and people who at whatever cost, and people who say that cost is too high. Right? I mean, is that the basic distinction? I feel like I was trying to drive toward a clarification there, and I think I created too many dimensions. Is it what I'm getting at is it an illusion that everybody can get along?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Now, is it an illusion that all people in the upper classes can get along?
Yes.
Probably.
I don't know.
The upper class have to serve a lower class. If you put all of them together, they're not servicing them as distinct groups. Lower class.
I mean, people who would be in the upper class are pushed down by a dominant upper class.
Say that again, Martin.
People who would otherwise be in the upper class are pushed down by the dominant upper class if it has different interests.
Let me see.
But I think
One doesn't have their place. We see this, and we brain drain everywhere around the world, meaning you're sending your people to America and you're lessening your country's agency.
Well, yeah. Although that's another moral statement. On the other hand, if I live in Seattle, right, which is it's like an IQ drain. It's one of the IQ drains.
Yep.
So if you live in Seattle and you're one of the IQ drains, you got people from all over the world, except they're all Aristotelian because they're all scientists and technologists.
Mhm.
Right. So we all get along just fine.
Mhm.
Because we're not dependent upon creating regularity by our norms and traditions. We're creating regularity by, our occupations, our marketplace position, our incomes, and stuff, etc. So, I mean, I can tell the difference between an upper class. I mean, I hired an upper class guy from India out of Microsoft. We worked together. I mean, I just love the fucking guy. Still incredibly successful. He's short. That's why I hired him. I got to hire a short Indian guy because I can. Anyway,
well, political interests demonstrate that even in the upper classes we still don't get along, because first thing Indian that gets into a position of power wants to do is get in more Indians.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, this tolerance for class it justifies not solving your own lower classes, right? It's just another form of demographic shift.
I think that's the right answer.
It's not racial demographic shift, it's class demographic shift. But all of those classes bring their entire class structure with them. You can't not bring your lower class with you. Just like when we invite other classes in, we still have our lower class. We haven't solved it.
Okay,
so we expect them to arrive without their lower class, following them to the new location. So it's just this class tolerance is just an excuse to not address your lower classes.
Yeah, other
what you're saying is the lower classes are the problem. I'm sorry.
No. Well, we don't use class to escape one another in the West. We all have duty. We're among one another. They use class as other places to escape problems. So there are people from other places are rising to the upper class and ignoring their lower classes. Luke is stating because it's a cost, one that they don't want to pay.
I was saying upper classes are a problem too if they don't respect our norms and want to change them towards their own norms.
Yeah. So fundamentally, it comes down to these problems are in the end the result of class distributions, and the reason and there's utility in kin preference, right? within races and sub-races and ethnicities, etc. And that utility doesn't disappear for anyone. It doesn't disappear at the top because it gets you power by numbers, and it doesn't disappear at the bottom because it gets you elites, right, and professionals. So, the where's the third one? Oh, and then the third problem is what I'm going to get beat up for this, for overusing this, but it's the causal axis, but basically neotenic distribution, which is even though it's a primary class problem, we have a neotenic difference between the races. So you have the neotenic race problem, you have the class problem. And so what you get is, no matter what you do, you get a proximity problem. Well, you get a proximity problem once it's out of the single digits. Because at single digits you can absorb. But as we know, it only takes about 1 to 3% of the population to undermine. So that's why intolerance is so important. The question is, what are you intolerant of? It's like
Irreciprocity.
Yeah, just what do you want? Yeah.
But I think in some ways what you're describing is, you have the same class stratification across different groups, but you don't have neoteny symmetry across groups. So you'll have the upper class of one group and the upper class of another group, and there's an asymmetry of neoteny between those two upper classes. So their incentives are going to be different.
So their instincts are different too.
Right.
Okay, now I have to ask the really hard question. I'm even afraid to ask this question because it's kind of obvious. If you look at neotenic distribution, it's like there's the Africans here, the South Eurasians here, which is North Africa, right? The Levant, Mesopotamia, Persia, India, right? And then I tend to forget the Turkic expansion, the Iranic expansion into the middle of the middle world, because really the original Turks are, closer to Chinese, right? But they've come over and inbred with everybody here, but they're primarily an Iranic group, in other words, a South Eurasian group. So South Eurasia, goes all the way over to the other side of India, all the way over to the west coast of Africa, right, to the northwest coast of Africa. It's a wide demographic population, and those people were originally mostly what we would call erotic or Persian Gulf, dry Persian Gulf origins, right? So you get that distribution because that's a very successful population. And so you get that huge span of people. Well, what's the difference between Africans and them? Well, it's a standard deviation. It's a lot. What's the difference between them and Europeans is a standard deviation. That's a lot. What's the difference between Europeans and East Asians? Well, it's a couple of points, right? I mean, it's was it 4 points right now? 5 points. So it's less than a half a standard deviation. And that's probably because we've declined since we started taking numbers, just as China is going to drop below. China's going to drop into the 90s over the next.
It's not just about the average. Their bell curve is also tighter
than ours. Yes, there's less variation because we're Europeans, we're mongrels. Well, Contra Fabian, you're like an admixture too, right? I mean, aren't you? Like you're one of you sort of got everybody's benefit.
Yeah, I'm kind of half Germanic if you go back a few generations, and then on my father's side, I'm Egyptian, but you go back a few generations, you see Turkey and Greece as well.
Yeah, so we're all mongrels, in Europe. So so I was trying, so let me ask, so if I make that statement that, you know, you have this standard deviation. So let me be, oh God, I'm gonna say this. Is this just a black problem?
Is what?
I think it's a proximity problem in the sense you have proximity, which is signaling discounts on cooperation, regardless of the rates of investment
Right.
between those groups. And you'll have that between, you know, any groups.
Right. So yeah, I'm trying to. You're correct, of course. What I'm trying to get at is there. The reason we have a problem with the Middle East is primarily religion, as far as I understand. The problem we have with the Africans is primarily aggression. That's my
That's also the problem they have with one another.
Oh, of course, yes. The problem we have with East Asians, when we have one, is only their remaining government that I know of. And secondly, that we are a very commons-oriented people, and they are not. So we have, and I want to get to that. I want to get to that because I think what we could do is we could start with that premise and get to the proximity premise, and that hierarchy would expose the chain of causality. Does that make sense? So you have a neotenic problem. You have what I would call a culture problem. You have a class problem, and you have a proximity problem. Is that about right? Does that make sense? Because I think that's the hierarchy of causality that creates these frictions. In other words, there's a biological issue, there's a cultural issue, there's a class issue, and then there's a proximity issue. And for most of us, for most groups, kin preference is the cheapest, most predictable way of acting, right? I mean, we're the least likely to engage in ignorance, error, bias, and deceit that get us into a problem with others. In other words, we kind of look at it as a positiva. I'm trying to look at it as a negativa. Is that what the case? We're always going to work together along proximity, class, culture, and neotenic. I'm going to choose neotenic over race lines, because that's actually the cheapest way for cheapest or the least costly, least burdensome, least stressful, least risky way of cooperating. So
that's not the only reason.
Okay, I laid out a theory, right? That has a causal hierarchy. Now we can now if I have a skeleton, let's refine it.
I don't disagree. It's just incomplete because no group that isn't ethnocentric can survive in competition with group that is.
Right. So I would say exactly for the reasons I just stated. Therefore, in other words, the therefore is there are no groups that aren't ethnocentric, right? I mean, we can see this everywhere. There's nowhere where we don't see it, except where in very rare cases where the institutional condition, i.e. the academy, does. And I'm not even sure it's true there. So yes, you're right. So I said, here's the equation, and you're just saying what the equal sign is, right? I mean,
I think we've substituted our kin for conveniences, and that we have groups based on cognitive preferences, not blood and soil any longer, and that we should revert by choice.
Have we substituted, or have we tried to substitute?
I don't know if it's been purposeful or not. I haven't thought through the frame all the way, but we try to afford conveniences, and it seems like when we do that, we box out relations, because relations are harder. They require cooperation, where conveniences do not.
Yeah, it's
Require a cost that we're foregoing, as Luke, I'm sure, was going to point out.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over.
No, please.
Yeah, convenience is a great word for it. We look at conveniences and we fail to do the full accounting of them, right? They look like lower costs or easiers or whatever, but that's only because we're not accounting for all of the costs. Yeah, you talked about the list of problems that we're looking at, right? And when I look at that, what I'm seeing is each one of those relieves the pressure that produces neoteny, that optimizes neoteny. All those are pressure release valves. And it's pressure that should be being applied.
That was really smart. Can you say that again?
Yeah, so the list of problems, right, that we've articulated, each one of those acts as a pressure release valve for the pressure that produces optimal neoteny for a group.
Oh, I love you. That was
like
brilliant.
everything from proximity to you know all of the aggression, all the things that we've been talking about. We're using those as convenient ways that they look like they're lowering costs, but really they're convenient ways to lower the pressure that produces neoteny.
Yes. Wow.
We're resisting adaptation.
You just explained why neoteny works, is the primary, is the almost exclusive direction of human evolution. Wow.
Conveniences are a poor discount on cooperative effort. Dimorphism is better.
Okay, you're gonna have to. You did one of those leaps again that we got to explain to the audience.
Cognitive cooperative adaptability. People choose dogs over people many times because dogs will adapt to you.
Yes.
They'll adapt to a cooperative, compatible endeavor with you.
Yes.
That will change their temperament in an adaptable fashion in order to get along with you. And present people are conditioned not to do that.
Okay, now let's explain that. Present people are not conditioned to adapt to other people. Now, I would call that desocialization.
Yes, it's antisocial. I would describe all of our social media networks as antisocial, as opposed to pro-social, which they ought to be. Because it's discounts on it's discounts on everyone else's attention.
Yep. I need you to go over that again, because I was getting some really good associations out of that. So can you try
Sure. My suggestion is we move away from attempting to tool conveniences so that people do not have to adapt, and replace them with cooperative endeavor between peoples so that they have to cooperate and adapt to one another. The proximity problem is solved by having enough people in your proximity that you feel safe. You have to bring in outsiders when you can't provide for yourselves.
Feel safe or feel low friction? Is that the same thing?
Oh yeah,
That's just an amplitude.
I use safe as a catch-all.
Yeah, that's an amplitude thing. So you feel safe at some amplitude, you feel friction below that, and you feel cost or utility below that. Okay, so it's just so safety is just an amplification of it. Okay. So, oh God, I can't tie it together. Luke's point was we're compensating for neoteny, right? Is that right? How did you say it, Luke?
Yeah, we're in our tolerance of the existence of those problems. We're avoiding avoiding the pressure that produces neoteny.
Yes. And so neoteny is the thing we seek, right? And that's why people move from low neoteny to high neoteny locations, right? That's what you're saying. I mean, in the end result, that's the driving.
Right. It's the trait required to successfully or effectively apply the technology of civilization.
Yeah.
Well, if it was just neoteny, everyone would be excited to move to Asia.
Yeah, there's an optimum for groups though. There's not
Yeah.
more is not always better. There's an optimum.
Right. I was going to say that when he was talking, I was like, so what you're saying is this is just right temperature to the porridge, right? I mean, and so there's enough neoteny. I would say the problem between East and West is only because they were trying to colonize the way they do in China, and we were colonizing the way we do. The problem is their method of colonization is produced stagnation, and ours produced innovation. And so China should have got there before we did, but they didn't. And so my view is that if the Chinese people were deprived of the Chinese Communist Party, that given their hard work and entrepreneurial ethic, etc., that they'd have to go through a period of corruption like India, but they'd eventually catch up to us.
Yeah, I think risk for the West in particular, exposure to risk acted as a proxy pressure for neoteny.
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned entrepreneurialism. I think that's a big one. Expansionism is another one. Right. Yeah. It was the individual was taking a lot of those risks in the European countries, whereas the Asian countries, a lot of it was top down insured from
centralized.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. Yeah.
So, a lot of this stuff's going to come down to, we're not going to be able to put the cat back in the bag. Right? I mean, the problem's here. So what we have to do is identify or create proxies for the missing pressures. Right, we had some proxies emerge, like expansionism. Just the exposure to risk acted as a proxy, as proximity occurred and things like that. Right, but we don't have those proxies in place anymore. There's no new place to explore. New businesses go out of business in less than 5 years. I mean,
well, Persia tried to escape Islam how many fucking times? I mean, like 4 times. It's only the most. They've been trying to recover. So what is going on there, right? I mean.
Yeah. What I'm getting at though is as we continue to minimize our risk, we're losing risk as a proxy pressure.
This is the argument you make in your book, which is that we've created so this utopian belief that we're free of the laws of nature is really the origin of the problem, and that's really what the
turns out that's unhealthy for humans.
Well, it's terribly unhealthy.
Well, we spent history trying to save humanity from nature, and now we have to save humanity from itself. Our science is awkward because most sciences work with precise knowledge and imprecise wisdom, and we work with imprecise knowledge and precise wisdom.
Hold on, that was good, but I didn't get it. Try that again.
Most sciences, they work with precise knowledge, measurements, and within their domain, right? And imprecise wisdom. They not understanding where applicability is optimal always. We work with imprecise knowledge across domains, precise wisdom, how to apply that knowledge to the world in an optimal sense.
Yes. So this is the problem of linear thinking. The natural human tendency to extrapolate a line instead of observe a distribution. So we take what we have, we predict it in the future without finding out the optimum. Well, we have to discover failure before we discover the optimum, right?
We have the data to pinpoint failure currently, the reversal of the Flynn effect and so on. We watched our adaptive velocity reverse. We know the pressures that cause the reversal.
Yeah, but
telling people to counteract those pressures with their agency, meaning move to places where people want to be around you and like you and work towards these cooperative ends as opposed to against one another. We're just going through the next stage of why shouldn't I kill you and take your stuff? Because the tribes that are emerging currently, they're going to kill you and take your stuff because they care about their people more than you. And you already built all the stuff.
Yeah.
We're trying to head off that problem as unfurling chaos.
Well, you can head up the problem, but you can't have the problem if people believe that that reality is an impediment that can be overcome by denial. I mean, that's, you know,
Luke
so
would say
that's
if
where
you
we
believe
are. I mean,
that-
you have to reverse it. I mean,
Luke would say if you believe that you're a child, and I'm not sure we have to take what they have to say seriously.
well, I mean, but now we, yeah, okay. So there's a whole. We always get this problem of which problem are we talking about? And so
It's like they're all connected.
they're all connected. So we switch between them, and then we fail in disambiguation to solve them. So
My frame is, which fight should we start first?
well, I know that, but you jumped ahead. so I think we created a skeleton, and Martin brought about the equation. Now, we created an equation. What's the equation problem? We know that. Okay, we created that. So that hierarchy explains the cause of the problem. I try, excuse me, the extreme position of, well, is this really a problem, or is this a problem if you've just got to be neotenous enough? You understand what I'm saying? And I suspect there's a piece of truth there. We know that, for example, I'm picking on the Jews again, they're more aggressive. They're aggressive in the female method, but they're more aggressive than we are because they're less neotenous. It may be that, and that's the interesting, the Ashkenazi, at least that's the ones I'm talking about. You know, do you have to be non-aggressive enough? Is that that I'm just exploring this idea. That's why I started out with the extreme of, is this just a black problem? Can the rest of the races get along together? And I would say, and the answer is, of course, no, because there's too many other variables. But
they can get along more.
What?
They can get along better than they can with blacks.
Right. But so the whole problem is the aggressive impulse, which turns into the defensive impulse, right? I mean, aggression defensive. In other words, how easily offended you are is determined by your aggression.
Passive aggression is aggression.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
I've never been in a relationship with a woman. I don't know about them.
Why don't I kill you and take your stuff? Is only a question if there's more than one answer.
Choice stuff coming out of this meeting.
Well, the level of aggression limits the number of answers to that question.
I see
Say that again. No, I was thinking. Can you say that again?
Yeah, no, the level of aggression limits the number of answers to that question.
Right.
I see what our enemy's doing as killing us and taking our stuff just slow.
Of course.
So and I see what we're doing is letting them.
Well,
yeah.
That's what I'd like to solve. I don't care what our enemies are doing.
All right. So there's two things, right? In order to there's convincing ourselves there's no alternative. And then there's convincing the people that wish there was an alternative or might believe there is an alternative that there is no alternative. And so the reason to talk about why, right, and understand it is so that we can science it enough to eliminate the objections, the people who would be resistant, and provide moral justification for them to do nothing, right? Even if it's to do nothing, to resist, it's provide them with moral justification. The people who get it already, well, they've got their moral justification, but they may have the wrong idea about, what's the right temperature, so to speak. I mean, we don't need fucking Nazi fascism. I mean, we just need to fucking suppress this goddamn problem of lying and denying. So, I mean, we solve this problem by understanding. We solve this problem of victory by understanding it, and so that we have a way to not only limit the extremes of our people who agree, but to get people who disagree to not resist, simply because they themselves aren't aggressive enough. But not so we have to get them to the point where they feel that it's morally okay for their neighbors to do the work that they want to do to change things.
Well, those people are, most of them are concerned with signaling more than with what they actually believe. And if they believe that they won't be considered bad or low status people after all that, then they'll change their beliefs.
Exactly. So that's the reason, not to jump ahead, sorry, just teasing. That's the reason not to jump ahead, is that we make sure that we understand what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that we do understand, and that it's not logical for people to behave other than the way they're behaving. And it's not just beliefs, it's genetics, right? It's distributions, it's indoctrinations, and it's proximity. And it turns out that it's just easier. I mean, I love everybody in this fucking group. You know, you're all fucking awesome guys, right? But of course, the difference between us is marginal. It's within the margins, right? I'm trying to think of. I can try to figure out who I'm going to pick on here, but you know, well, pick on you. I mean, you, Brandon, of course. We know that you're a bit different. Anyway, the difference between us is marginal, so it's really easy to cooperate. You know, add a woman to the mix, and what'll fucking happen? See what I did there? You guys aren't going to play.
Let's not do that.
I serve up a goddamn softball, and nobody will step up to the point. Play. It's an easy home run. I got to take my 35 pills here. Give me a second. So, and where was I trying to get with that? So, you know, I mean,
I see it mostly as a framing problem. The problem with the right is they frame the left as irrational. They're not irrational. They're rational, amoral for the framework that they're working in. If you don't understand the frame, that's on you.
Yeah.
It's a different definition of rationality.
It's bound. Rationality, as far as I know, is bounded to a framework.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's an incentive built into the framework. So it's actually relative.
Logical and rational are two different things. We tend to confuse them. Logical is a matter of truth, and rational is a matter of incentives. And we tend to think that those two things go together, and they don't. Though they're not logical, doesn't mean they're not rational. Well, I mean, so then you end up with the next questions. Okay, so even within, now that we've gotten to the ethnocentric side of it, or at least the marginal indifference of ethnocentricity, which is really what it is. Are you marginally indifferent enough? I mean, it's not like you look at, there aren't going to be any Asians, American Asians, pretty quickly, because they're outbreeding so fast. There aren't going to be any Asians left, right? Be between white, Asian, and Jewish intermarriage at that level, and white and Hispanic intermarriage, and black and Hispanic intermarriage. You know, these things are all continuing along predictive paths. But I mean, there's absolutely no conflict between educated East Asians and educated Europeans. Well, at least not for the Asian females. It isn't a problem. It might be for the males. I haven't quite figured that part out yet. But so within it, you still have the moral bifurcation. In other words, to continue our journey up the tree, sure, we end up with cultural proximity, but now even in proximity, we've got the problem of moral masculine feminine moral bifurcation. So can we live with the progressives?
Well, they're immoral. I'm not sure I'd want to live around anyone who's immoral.
Right, but they
So
think,
again, are those sincere conviction, or do they have them because they believe their high status that way?
yeah, I don't know the answer.
We should take away
I'm pretty sure they do.
we have to remove their affordance for status via criminality and lying.
Okay,
Shit.
so this
And
is
it's clear.
I don't think I ever believed that was possible before this moment.
They're just religious. That is how religiosity expresses itself today.
Huh.
Historically, they would
If
have
that's true, then the right of victory is actually, then conquest rather than separation is actually the moral objective. Interesting. It might seem like I just came to that really quickly, but it's been struggling with me for years. So it just if they are, that we know it's immoral, right? Right.
Measurably, objectively, and demonstrably immoral.
Right, but it's my non-aggression level that says we should just separate them. So
That's your non-aggression.
So my non-aggression is actually immoral.
Correct.
Can I go to bed now?
Yes.
I just need it. I'm gonna need a little while to take that one in.
Well, it's like foregoing. It's like foregoing.
That really fucking hurt. Okay, let me. I want to share my suffering. That hurt. You just vaporize in this conversation. You vaporized my confidence in my generation's social bias and political biases, and now you've vaporized my moral bias. I don't like, you guys are like, this is not very. If this is an intervention, you could have told me ahead of time.
Slaughter day.
We didn't know it was an emergent intervention.
Bunch of bastards. You're so cruel, heartless.
One of the things I think we run into, a group that operates with high investment parenting, they can't apply conquest to children, right? And so we're not going to conquer the people that we're extending childhood forbearance to. So we need to learn how to withdraw that childhood forbearance from the progressives. And as we do that, the ones that are capable of adapting without forbearance will, and then the ones that are left are the ones that need to be conquered.
I don't know why I got to hear that a second time. I think what's happening is you give me so many ideas while you're talking. I have to hear it the second time so I don't lose my train of thought. So
we're not going to attack our children, and we're treating them like children. So we're not going to attack them or conquer them or do anything negative to them while we're treating them like children. We're extending the forbearance we ought to be reserving for our children to this whole group of people to accommodate for their behavioral flexibility. Right? That's what we're doing. That's how progressives exist amongst us. It's because of like you said, our restraint, our lack of aggression, our forbearance.
Yeah, the problem is, like you say, that what is it? Forbearance versus tolerance, right? You're saying that we think we're being forbearing, and it's turning out we're tolerating,
right?
And that shouldn't be happening.
That's the trick that they get away with those, because they want to convince us that it's tolerance instead of forbearance. As soon as it's forbearance, we have to acknowledge that we're investing in it, that we're intentionally choosing it. Once we do that, then we have to take responsibility for it, and we can withdraw that forbearance. And as we withdraw the forbearance, the behavior has suddenly has costs again being applied to it. So the people that are capable of recognizing or accounting for those costs will change their behavior, and the ones that can't are the ones that will need to be conquered.
Okay.
My major goal is getting rid of the sources of false religion, false morality, false status hierarchy.
Me too. I don't really care. I know everybody wants me to care more about the ethnicity thing, but what I really care about is just low aggression and um I like, Little England, Scandinavia. I want to go back to that level of high trust and just less conflict. Otherwise, I just don't fucking care. That's my opinion, right? And I wish I had that, but what you're telling me is, regardless of my opinion, regardless of my low aggression, regardless of my generational framing, regardless of my Christian optimism, that's actually a bunch of excuses not to be responsible and moral. And so, can you not fuck up my life any more than that in one 90-minute period, please?
Sorry, but it just seems to me that ignoring ethnicity is ignoring evolutionary laws.
Well, I agree, but I mean, I can, it's like, if I'm working toward, is there a solution to this? And the solution is separation. That's an obvious answer. But my solution didn't say that. It says, do whatever the fuck you want. Here's a plan for whatever social and political system you prefer, and let the market work it out.
And any group that neglects to correct for its in-group undermining will eventually cease to be a group.
We'll turn into a very different group at the end of it.
That's what I mean. That means the original group ceases to be.
Yeah. Okay.
So to the degree that your tolerance of the other in your midst because of class allows you to neglect correcting or solving for your in-group undermining, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, because I'm from a class, and I've certainly worked myself into a class, because I'm in a generation, I'm extending my optimism to people to who it's harmful. I'm trying to get to see if I got that across or not. I'm not seeing any recognition there. So
you can do it as long as you're also paying the cost of the correction of your in-group undermining.
Yeah. So there's a sort of how fascinating.
We should just use courts and the law as the outlet for aggression, as far as I can tell. Give people a moral reason to be aggressive. There are plenty of aggressive people that'll do the job. Here's how you direct your aggression.
Right. If you can't, in other words, we have to stop people doing it by lying and denying and false promising and all this other crap, and limit them to truthful, reciprocal.
They will self-sort reciprocally under those conditions, but under these conditions, they immorally sort based on incentivized externalities. Okay. External incentives, excuse me.
You guys are mean.
See, we think that the system is mean.
I'm just teasing. Well, the system isn't mean. It's just dumb and ignorant. I mean, it does the best it can.
Yes, correct.
It's run by the enemy.
Well, I mean, it's run by the enemy because we were fucking Christian, optimistic, classical liberal, Enlightenment children of optimistic stupidity. And now we've run our experiment and turned out it doesn't work, and we have to clean up the fucking mess now that the test tubes have broken and the flammables have hit the floor and the places on fire. Now we've got to clean up the mess. So we ran an experiment. I can't argue that it was a moral one.
I don't think any of this was implied by classical liberalism.
Well, I don't think any of the left was. Even the classical liberalism was optimistic. The Enlightenment was more optimistic, and the progressive is more optimistic. And they're all completely this fucking progression of optimistic nonsense. I mean, I don't know why it should be surprising to us that we discovered at the end it doesn't work. On the other hand, we don't need feudalism.
Just to spin off a little bit of what Brandon said about, court being the avenue for aggression. I think competition in general is an avenue for aggression. The problem that we're running into now is that competition exists within limits.
I don't know. Yeah, but that you got to complete that. I don't. It doesn't tie together.
Right. So, so what that means is that as an ideology pursues the elimination of limits, they're actually eliminating the opportunities for positive expressions of aggression.
Yes. Well,
So every reduction in competition reduces our ability to positively express aggression.
Yes. Well, we're running.
And every reduction in limits reduces our ability for competition.
Yes.
Why we have to relicense punch in the face?
Yes. Yeah. And people that aren't understanding what I mean there, any standard is a limit, right? And so we're competing by this standard. We're measuring by this standard. That's what competition is, right? Against this standard, one is superior to the other. That is what competition is. So when I say limits, that's what I'm talking about.
There are limits to non-aggression. At some point, aggression is the answer, not non-aggression. And you can't just have a passive. You can't just have a signal for non-aggression. Non-aggression can't be your. We had heroes, and duty, and so on, and it was necessary to compete against this place. We need to replace all those proxies for aggression. You can't have aggression go away.
Yeah, but we need a standard, and so what we've provided is the standard.
We're providing the standard.
Okay. I just got to interject because I want to get him involved here. So, Contra Fabian. So, what do you think of our meeting so far?
I like it, man. I'm just mostly taking it in here. I'm learning a lot. Kind of computing how I'm going to operationalize this.
All right. I think you're very talented, and I'm very thankful that you've joined us. So I think we're all thankful you've joined us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm kind of all confused. I don't know what to do. I got to take a nap now. Have a cheeseburger, and think for a while about how I'm going to change my attitude. So have we covered that topic? What have we learned? Well, I originally wanted to explore the idea of because we started out with the purpose of our conversation was to explore the Scott Adams canceling and what he was really trying to say, and if the fact that he said it and brought it out in the open will have any effect, and we're working through that, and we ended up here. Okay, well, great. Well, it ended up in a good place.
All of that occurred before we started recording, so that's new for the audience.
Yeah, we just, I was like, wait a minute, we got to be recording this. This is good. And then we got the good stuff out of it. So we're trying to get somewhere with that. And I think we got somewhere, but I'm trying to go back with, did we answer anything interesting about is the hate group thing, right? I mean, I feel like the Jews and the blacks are hate groups because my experience is they're hate groups. My experience is that the progressives are a hate group, right? And so now, and I'm sure that they think we're a hate group. The right is a hate group, the conservatives, the libertarians, right? Those are all hate groups because we're actually in conflict with each other. So, but what defines a hate group? I don't really know the fucking answer. It just
I don't like that framing because it was invented by the enemy.
Yeah, I know. That's where I was. You jumped ahead. So, so what does this term really mean? Does it mean anything?
Well, it means something for them, certainly.
Right.
It's
it's like you're special, right? God damn it! I got this. I forgot to shut that down.
It's the signal answer to a competitive group strategy.
Yeah, exactly. We're in competition.
So the questions are: is that hate based on something real? Is it justified, or is it based on a deceit? Who is doing the deceit? If someone, and how do they respond to that emotion?
Wait a minute, I have to get back to you. So wait a minute. So let me ask the question. So what are we referring to when we call a group a hate group? Isn't it just that anybody disagrees with us has got this label of a hate group? I mean,
that is the common usage, yes.
so it's anybody who's in opposition to us.
The grown-up question to ask here is, why does it matter to your group if that group hates your group?
Oh, because I see. So in a democratic society, it actually can affect outcomes. Whereas in society where people don't have political power, it doesn't matter. So that would mean hate group is an outgrowth of ideology, because ideology is an outgrowth of democracy.
That brings us back to the fact that we're not a democratic society, because there's not a society. And
there's not a democracy.
Yes.
Another question to ask when somebody is hated, if he somehow earned that hate.
But wait a minute, I want to. So what that means is the purpose of a hate group is to advance an ideology in order to compensate for the fact that we aren't a democracy. There are special interests. So the purpose of a hate group is to empower special interests to be able to execute power that circumvents democratic, Republican, concurrent consensus institutions, right? Concurrent common institutions. Yeah, okay, great. So now we know what a hate group is. All right, it's just an outgrowth of ideology. All right, so then Mark, go back to what you said there, right? Because I just had to finish that arc.
When somebody is hated, we need to ask if he's hated for a reason.
Yes. Well, I mean, we're in conflict for a reason, right?
Yes. And there are
so isn't hate hyperbola? In other words, when you say it's a hate group, isn't that just hyperbola? Isn't that the same? The left's use the same.
It's emotionally loading.
It's a feminine framing.
Yeah,
right.
They can't imagine that we just have conflicting interests without outright hating them.
Yeah, it's signaling an unwillingness to cooperate.
Yeah,
I think in a sense.
Oh, it's blaming them for an unwillingness to cooperate, for your unwillingness to cooperate
on their terms.
Yeah, it's a blame projection.
And I love it because women are always projecting. The female mind, the feminine mind, is always projecting how they perceive the world on you, and you're like, I couldn't think that way unless I worked at it. You know, I don't have those feelings. If I had those feelings, I would say, I try to explain this to psychologists. When the feminine mind thinks of hurt and anger and vulnerability and victimhood, and the masculine conservative mind largely thinks of exasperation and frustration. In other words, it's a question of obstacles, not a question of intentions. It's very interesting that they can't. It's like the more you work on the sex difference, the more frustrating. It's amazing we fucking get along at all. I mean, really, it's just amazing. Anything bigger than a band or a tribe, right? It's the fact that we get along at all is a miracle. Anyway, all right. So I think you were going somewhere, and I took you off a direction because I was trying to figure something out. So Martin, what did you just say, Les? It's just a hate group thing.
It's a feminine framing because they think we couldn't possibly have competing interests unless we hated them.
Yeah, unless you, yes, okay. It would have to be an emotional, it'd have personal reaction. All right, okay. Very feminine. But why did, so that gets us back to the big question is, why do men give a shit about the feminine framing? Because we just listen, we most of the time we ignore women, right? I mean, it's mostly nonsense.
For
Well, let's
most,
see what happens when we ignore it.
through most of the time, we were separated from one another, unless, right?
Right, we live in greater proximity to women. Men and women live in greater
Than
proximity
ever before.
than ever before, correct. So this is natural that in this increase in proximity, given the bifurcation, we know the polarity of our moral intuitions and our cognitive framing, obviously we'd end up with more intersexual competition. And less, and we also have less, because the dilution of the roles, because women have economic, right? We have less need for compromise, and we're desocialized, right?
Yes.
So we have more and more opportunity for more granular, but more granular conflict. It's more difficult to ameliorate because there are no means of ameliorating it, right? There's, unless we separate. Okay,
We
thank you.
needed to make children the means of
Yes.
ameliorating conflict, right? Incentivize them so that we
Right, that's why the
become
family has to be
compatible
the
again.
institution, not the individual. Right, you get,
Yes.
this is so obvious, right? That the family has to be the purpose of institutions, right? Not the individual. The individual has to be the target of law because only individuals can act. But for policy and legislation and institutions, the function has to be the family, not the individual. And the individual only so much as he or she assists in the production of the intergenerational family. Otherwise, what you've got is you don't have a society, because family is what makes a society have commons, right? Have need for the common. If you're just individuals, then you're all individual flakes running off in different directions with there is no commons. Because all you can do that way is all you can do as individuals is undermine those institutions that try to create commons, which is what's happening. Okay. Wow, what a nightmare.
We're in a cultural pickle.
A pickle. It just seemed like a very unbranded thing to say.
Yeah, I don't even like baseball.
I thought you were making a Rick and Morty reference.
A brick and mortar or a Rick and Morty? Which did you say? I don't know.
Latter.
Okay.
Oh, like yeah, all right.
All right. What else have we got going on here? What we beat that subject down with enough detail yet?
Yeah, did we come to a conclusion whether or not Scott accelerated or decelerated our racial tensions?
I think anything that makes it possible to have the discussion is helpful. I don't know how durable it is.
Yeah.
I suspect people on the right and left are both going to hang on to it for a while and see how far they can take it. I played a lot in his. Go ahead.
The left just says Scott Adams is a bad person, and that's the end of it.
Maybe. But he's also now got license to, go both barrels on things he didn't have before. And he's got every incentive to. So we'll see. He's certainly coming out.
Remember, he's a leftist. So for all of his
He's
biases,
he's a pretty
not a
centrist.
centrist.
You don't think so?
Leftist. No, all of his voting, he outright says it. All the way he votes, all of his policy preferences, they're all hard left.
Okay.
So,
in that interview,
Go ahead, Mark.
Interview with Hotep Jesus, he outright said he supports affirmative action.
Yeah, I mean he can see both movies, which makes it look like he's not like he's a centrist, but he's not a centrist. He just can view both movies.
I mean, what even is centrism? It's just leftism a while back.
I mean, that's again
by any
one of those
historical
things.
standard, it wouldn't be centrism.
Yeah, I would put him in. You're right. Well, I mean, left. I mean, for us, I would say he's center. I mean, I looked at, I look at the guys who I can listen to, they're all center left, right? I mean, so if you want to say he's left wing, whatever, he's center left. I would agree with that. It's got
Yeah,
fun, it doesn't matter.
if people actually on the left are those who explicitly want to murder rights, then yes, he's.
But if you look at his, in what he talks about, he's generally on the same page as we are with lying. You know, I've gotten two things out of him that have been very important, is how the left and the media use incremental accusation, right? And moving on. I mean, he's diagrammed that out nicely. And if you watch the short version, I don't know if I think I sent a clip of it, a link to it to you guys. If you watch what he said, I think it was yesterday, on how the cancel process works. I mean, he's an awful lot about lying. He might be a policy center leftist, but in the sense that we care about him, or the conservative audience who largely follows him cares, he's basically against the lying, and I think that's fine. If you say he's left optimistic, I mean, I guess I have to agree with that.
I'd say he's a real progressive, and he wants to see progress, and he's willing to tool it logically by human means, technological means, as opposed to he looks like he's a straight shooter, and he wants people to get along. He probably shares your biases that you just attempted to shed this conversation.
Yep.
Right. He wants the institutions to work. He wants the mainstream media to give us news.
From my framing of active versus passive, he's an active progressive.
That's good. Yeah.
He actually invests in his progress.
He's working with all the institutions and groups that he's attempting to steward forward. He reached out to Black Lives Matter to find out that they were not an organization you could work with, but he reached out to them in hopes he could. In his books, he describes being fired from his banking job, leaving his banking job because they would not hire any higher in management white men. They said, we're not hiring white men any higher than this anymore. And that's when he left. And that was like the early 2000s or the 90s or something like that. There's been a lot of institutions that have stopped hiring people as capable as Scott Adams, and those people don't turn out to be brilliant cartoonists. They end up.
They're also destroying American competitiveness.
Yeah, it's been terrible.
It's undermining every field we're in. We're seeing it everywhere.
It's been terrible. So I'm not sure if holding on to his biases means he's slow, or he's just so successful that he's able to do that. But all the things that have happened in his life points to you can't help those people as much as you've been helping them. It's not helping. He has an audience from it. He sells books because of it. But where are the changes in outcomes that he's professing he'd like to see? They're not in reality.
Yeah.
Still all going the wrong way. And I like Scott Adams. I have his books, read them. I think his framing of focusing on the future instead of the past is, other than the upsetting people's biases about race, was his best framing.
Okay. Well, I don't want to make it about him. That's usually not fruitful. What I want to figure out is his behavior indicative of any further motion of the Overton window? And and he seems to have made some impact on the discourse a little bit.
He opened up some abstract landscape for people to take home on, for sure.
So I'm not sure that's bad. I think that's probably beneficial.
There's a idea going around now that there's going to be a dialing back of woke because they kind of overextended themselves. I think he's going to be a convenient source of that dialing back. He's going to contribute to that dynamic.
Yeah, but the rest of it is that it's actually a problem for us because it makes people less likely to actually do something.
Correct. Yeah. All it does is decreasing the aggressiveness only increases the utility of incrementalism.
justifying the continuation of their restraint. So yeah, I don't see it as a positive, but I think it's going to play that way because he's putting that whole conversation on the radar, on the dynamic, and it's such a woke touch point that it's going to contribute to that dialing back of woke.
Specifically, it said that they need white boys to fight their wars.
Right. Yeah.
So, so the Gen, what is it, Gen Z or millennials, whatever they are, right? So who's the group that's in their 20s now, early 20s now?
Gen Z.
Yeah. Millennials are getting to be what?
I'm a millennial.
I mean, I'm approaching 40, so
Yeah.
we're in our 30s and 40s, or rather late 20s and 30s.
That's what I think. So I'm not really in touch with the millennial mind, right? The millennials I understand because I have kids that age, right? But the Gen Z kids, they make no sense to me at all. And I don't have any insight into them because I don't spend any time with them. And everybody I have spent time with, they sound retarded. So it's just really embarrassing. Now, there seems to be some sort of bifurcation in Gen Z between the crazies and the not crazies. Is this an illusion that we're over amplifying, or is there really a pretty serious divide in that generation?
There is a minority of them that sees something must have gone very wrong.
Yeah, so personally, I only see that in the men.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. What I do kind of find interesting about Gen Z, at least when I interact, especially in all male groups, because violence is always on the table ultimately. So it's more costly to make accusations.
Yep.
So we can get close to the truth. But what I find interesting is that it's kind of safe to criticize the woke. I think kind of the biggest barrier is the legacy of 20th century pseudoscience. I think that's kind of the unpassable barrier for my generation.
Yeah. So Luke, you're Gen X, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got Gen X. We've got I don't know, Gen Jones, Gen X, what do you guys call it? Millennials? Is that you too, Martin, right?
Yeah. That's Mark too.
Right.
Well, millennial is Gen Y.
Oh, I see. So X, Y.
That's Z.
Yeah. And then contra. It's going to be hard for me to keep not using your name.
You use my first name. That's fine.
Okay. So the you consider yourself Z, right? Because you're part of the Z generation. Is that right?
Yeah, 2001.
Yeah. So we've got a pretty good spectrum here. Thank God we don't have any boomers. That would be fucking nightmare. Somebody be sitting here trying to tell us we should have free love. And
we're one of the only groups that span across the age generations. I think I've noted that before, but there's not many that take into account other generations by age. You'll see that they're mostly a cluster of one or two generations.
Yeah.
That share a context based on the time they were born.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of hope that we got the spectrum of generations here. There's got to be some positive hope in that. I don't know how you got there to write that goddamn book on liberty at your fucking age. That just was insane. What the hell is wrong with you?
I still think about it. I mean, I was 17. I still look at it with pessimism. Like I can only think of the mistakes that I made.
Well, we all do that, right? It's what we all do. It's like anything you write. That's one of the problems with writing something down. It's like doing your own. Like if you hire a carpenter to come fix something in your house, it looks fine to you. But if you go fix it yourself, you always notice the one fucking spot you screwed up on the paint and it makes you nuts. I mean, it's the same shit, right? It doesn't matter. We're all the same. But anyway. The fact that you could do that at 17, I mean, just think that's just fucking Jesus Christ. You're a goddamn machine. You're awesome. All right. So have we got that topic? We don't know if it's going to go anywhere. This has been a very strange meeting for me because I've had a lot of shift and thought on it. I'm not sure I like it. I'm sort of feeling sort of confused. Where are my notes here? All right. Anything else?
I mean, all I thought is that people are bots, and I thought you knew that.
People are what?
Bots.
Bots, yes. Too depressing. You just don't. You guys have to. I mean, I know. Don't you guys have to leave some comforting illusion to yourself, right? No. I'm the only one here that does that. That preserves some naive, childish, optimistic illusion that all things can be happy and butterflies and rainbows and unicorns. No. Okay.
I've had enough of rainbows.
All right. So now on to all right. So I think that's what I want to share. Do you have I don't know. Sometimes I want to just say, because I got some institute business to go into now, and I think that's just offline. So should we end the recording here? Because we got the real value in for everybody. All right, thank you. It's Thursday, March 2nd. This is our staff meeting. I hope I got a lot out of it. I hope the audience got something out of it. Say bye. Bye.